Welcome to Uncompromised Talk. I'm Renard. If you're a thinker and more interested in dealing with reality and discovering truth than you are into looking good and keeping the status quo, then you're in the right place. From science to religion and personal growth to current events, from financial health to physical health, if you want it straight, let's have some uncompromised talk. All right, everybody. I'm here today with Hal Shurtleff. He's an old friend, but he's got a butt, and he's a guy I've wanted to have on for some time. Just a sharp guy, been around the block, and he's got a lot of insights about America, the Constitution, history, and one of the things I'm really most into is how to take personal responsibility to help create yourself a better man or woman, and also make a difference in society. So here's a little bio on Hal. He's the main man at Camp Constitution, which is an all-volunteer association formed in 2009. It offers classes and workshops on a number of subjects, including U.S. history, the Constitution, and current events, and how to be a freedom activist. Let's see, what else? What else do I want to say about you, Hal? Yeah, you're the main guy for the YouTube channel, Facebook page, the publishing division, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
That's right. Actually, I've become full-time in February of last year, so I'm the only full-time person.
Okay.
Staff full-time. My title is camp director, and I'm the co-founder.
All right. Camp director and founder. Absolutely. All right, my friend. Let's just dive in with, I know we're not going to have a great form that we have to follow on this, but tell us a little bit about Camp Constitution. I'll just say quick for the record that my boys and I went last year. It was fantastic. The boys both have talked about wanting to go again. We're making it work with our schedule, and they learned a lot. One of the great things that I experienced was I've talked to them for a long time about, as you know, about the Constitution, about the things that are going on under the radar, the news behind the news, so to speak, and they've never really questioned it per se. They just understood my arguments and my points and could see the hypocrisy out in the news and in society. Things didn't quite line up. But it was really great to be in an atmosphere with other people who this was just normal everyday sustenance to have these types of conversations. So that was a real benefit. But can you say some more about the camp and what its main goal is?
Yes. Well, let me just get back. We formed it in winter of 2008, December. There was a camp that there was a few of and you actually participated in this national program that was canceled.
Right. And
so a few of us got together and said, hey, let's do this in the Northeast. So we had our very first family camp, summer camp, in 2009 in New Hampshire, the Toanippi Retreat Center, where we've been there for 9 years. And then as time went on, we had a need to publish some things out of print. So we started a publishing arm, had an opportunity to, had a friend up in northern Maine that owns a radio station. Hey, would you like to have a radio show? I said, yeah, let's do that. And then last year I became its full-time director. So we started a speakers bureau. We've had a YouTube channel now for about 6 years. But I'm doing a lot more with it now, obviously, as a full-time thing, a Facebook page. And something, I want to get a little flyer here, if you can see it here, the Sam Blumenfeld Archives.
That's great.
I'm very, very proud of this. Sam, I think you may have known Sam. Sam was a pioneer in the homeschool movement. He passed away in 2015. He had just turned 89. We inherited his library. I was a close friend of his, and he was also a camp instructor. He was the author of about 15 books, mainly on education, criticizing the government schools and so forth. He also created something called Alpha Phonics, which is a way to teach people how to read, mostly children, but anybody, adults who are functionally illiterate can learn how to read properly. And we uploaded much of his work on on our website, the Sam Blumenfeld Archives, and it's free. And last year, we got over 2 million views of his works. We got some of his stuff that had been previously unpublished, all of his lessons, 128 lessons in audio and video for the Alpha Phonics, probably about a month's worth of speeches between audio and video. He spoke on the subject. People are waking up today about Common Core and how dangerous public schools are. There's a school shooting, it seems like every month now.
Right.
Sam pointed the finger at dyslexia. He pointed the finger at the psychotropic drugs that are being used generations ago. So it's we're very proud of this. It's a free resource to anybody. And you just go to the website. I think we just ask for an email address to log in. And you get some great stuff. If you're into history, Sam was a founder of Friends of Gatanga. He's got a correspondence between the late Mose Shombe, just incredible resource. All his newsletters are there. So it's one of the things we're very proud of. And our Speakers Bureau.
Before you go on, I want to make sure that we come back and talk about, not now necessarily, but we come back and talk about Katanga, because most people don't know that story.
They don't know. That's true, yeah.
And that brings us into the United Nations and its sordid past, and why are we, so there's a whole bunch there. But let's circle back around. This is good context as to why we should even care about Samuel Blumenfeld, but I want to make sure we come back to that story in particular.
Sure. So, and we have information tables at fairs and homeschool shows. In fact, next week I'll be heading up to Maine for several days at a homeschool show. We do one in central Massachusetts, the Mass Hope, and we hopefully do one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We did it last year, and we'll add a few too. And I just got some news that we're going to start a weekend camp in addition to a family camp that's which we'll talk about in a little more detail. We found a little camp. It's not a huge place, but a nice couple that owns it, and we're going to start a camp. It's going to be in the middle of September.
Whereabouts?
It's going to be in the town of Damariscotta, Maine, which is coastal central Maine.
Okay.
So we'll probably just attract people from that region, and we travel for as far as Fort Kent, Maine, all the way to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'll be heading Virginia the end of the month, doing some things. We'll do something. We're doing an outreach in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on the dangers of an Article 5 press conference. So we stay very busy.
So, of course, we'll have to talk about that as well. What is then the chief purpose of Camp Constitution? Let's hit that and then let's start.
Well, I guess we can, in our motto is honoring the past. So we teaching people about the importance of our history, our heritage. So honoring the past, teaching the present. And it's not just young people. There's a lot of folks our age that, learn a lot. When they come to camp, they learn a whole lot too. And then preparing the future. The last election, something like 80% of people under 30 voted for Hillary or Sanders. So the only way we can solve that problem is that we never die. That's probably not likely to happen.
Yep.
We have to live forever.
Yep.
Or we have to get that 80% down to a workable level, and we have to reach out to young people and give them the message of freedom and liberty.
Right.
And not only the message, you can have all the facts. You can memorize the Constitution. You could digest this stuff, but then you have to put it to work. You have to go out and make it happen and become liberty activists. So that's really our mission.
All right. So just to touch on the work that you and I haven't spoken in a few months or so, but the work that I'm doing increasingly is about helping individuals recognize their individual responsibility, not only to do, in terms of the work that I've done for a long time, to know themselves, to live out the best version of their life. But the assumption is when one does that, when one really understands the foundations of individual freedom, which is ultimately fulfillment, they'll see that they have got to take supreme responsibility for themselves.
That's
and when you take responsibility for yourselves, when you take responsibility for yourself and you work hard and you create things, the last thing you want to do is just give it away willy-nilly. You want to be very deliberate about how you share your resources and utilize them. And that is not a socialist mindset, which is everything I create is equally everybody else's. And I'm supposed to care, so to speak, for the kid in Alabama as much as I do for your kids. And it's absolutely ludicrous. So, with that said, having people understand the principles that America was founded on, and to understand and honor that past and be able to do something powerful with it in the present too, not only for ourselves, but for our posterity. Amen. And that's how you have a better future. So I'm on board with what you're up to, and psyched to dive in. Can we just dive into Katanga? Because I will kick myself.
All right.
Touch it. My gosh. All right. So let me just do the fast forward of what I understand about Katanga, and you tell me where I'm off. All right. So the Congo, Belgians colonized it, right? Way back when?
That's right.
Okay.
No, we're talking about early 1960s.
Okay, good. Yeah. Then we have, so what's the communist influence in Congo at the time?
Well, the man that became the leader of what was the Belgian Congo, now it's Zaire, he was trained in Moscow, Patrice Lumumba.
Lumumba, that's right.
And when you're trained in Moscow in the 1960s, it's a safe bet you're not going to come out of there as a disciple of Honorando von Mises. It's a safe bet. You're there as an operative.
Right.
And, there was a province of this country called Katanga, and it was led by a pro-Western leader. He was a Christian. He was pro-Western. You had a population of blacks, Muslims, Christians. You had a small middle class, but growing middle class. it wasn't such a, for Africa, Southern Africa, I said Sub-Saharan Africa, it was a prosperous place that was happening.
Yep.
And what happened was when the communists took over, you had chaos. So he seceded. He said, we're not, I don't want to be, I'm seceding from chaos, I think were his words. And the UN, violating its charter, decided, no, you can't do that. Well, why do they care about Katanga? I mean, it's a province, and well, because there was uranium there. That's why. And so they waged a very bloody war. And there's a video, it may be on our YouTube channel, Camp Constitution, put in Katanga. And you'll see this documentary about how the UN went in, mostly white troops, by the way, and the UN so-called peacekeepers. I don't know what they're keeping, but definitely not the peace. They went to wage war. They bombed hospitals, they raped and they murdered and so forth. And eventually, Shombe got control. He had to leave, and he came back, and eventually he was kidnapped by Algerian communists, and he died in prison. But Sam Blumenfeld became a good friend of his, and he actually interviewed him in Spain when he was in exile in Madrid. And now Sam was fluent in French, and Shombe spoke French and English, but he was more comfortable in French. And Sam used the word conspiracy. And he told me the story, and he said, Shombe said, "Ma oui, la force occult." You know.
What is it? So but of course, what?
The occult force. He used the term occult forces. Behind his
occult forces. Okay.
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty interesting. So Sam had an organization called American Friends of Katanga, and they tried to alert American people about what was happening and why we should get out of the UN, why the UN was basically a war-making organization. And that was one of the first times that the UN was used in that capacity, and they're doing it ever since. If you go do a search on any computer and put down UN peacekeeper atrocities, and you're going to find even recent things in Haiti and the Ivory Coast,
right?
What happened, Rwanda. In that case, it's what they didn't do, not what they did.
That's right. They watched. That's right. They stood down while people were being butchered and taken out systematically from arenas where they were gathered and butchered. The thing about Katanga that always stands out for me is his idea was, hey, pro-Western, let's make this a great let's make America great again. Let's he said, I'm seceding from chaos. We're not going to be run by this communistic thing. We're going to allow people some freedom. And didn't even ask, did he ask the Belgians to leave? He asked them to leave first, but then he said, no, I'm asking them to stay on to protect us.
That's right.
And then the UN came in and just slaughtered everybody and made sure that peace and freedom couldn't happen, that everything had to be put back under the control of Patrice Lumumba.
That's correct. That's right. That's what happened, yeah. And we see a pattern of that. When you see UN peacekeepers, they're not there to bring freedom. They're to usually bring tyranny, and usually propping up a communist or a socialist type of dictatorship in their wake. What's
your, either what you know or your sense of, because I've certainly had various perspectives on the United Nations. One, it's just, it's a bunch of do-gooders. Two, it's a way to subvert, national sovereignty, particularly that of the the United States. And then, maybe it's the United States tool to do its dirty work. What is your take on the? And by the way, when I say the United States, I don't mean guys like you and I. I mean the people that are running the damn show.
Yeah, the military-industrial complex. Well, it's probably a little of all what you just said. But if you read the charter, the UN charter, it's diametrically opposed to the U.S. Constitution. In the UN charter, rights are sort of granted and then qualified out of existence. Where the United States Constitution, you have basic rights. They don't give you the rights. You already have them. And the Constitution gives certain powers to various branches of government. And what they didn't specifically define, for example, that Congress raises taxes, actually there's about 30 powers and duties that Congress has spelled out in Article 1. And the 9th and 10th Amendments basically said, if we forgot anything, you can't mess with them either. So, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom not to have a religion, freedom, you can marry whom you want, all these kinds of, all left to the states. Education left to the individuals and so forth. So under the UN, it's just the opposite. And the UN was set up to be a world government. People don't want to. It's funny when you go back to the 1940s. There were groups like the Atlantic Union, World Federalists, which still exist. The Atlantic Union doesn't, and they were openly talking about changing our constitution to have a world government. And
really,
in the wake of this isn't any like some kind of conspiracy theory. It was pretty much open. In fact, Wendell Willkie, who was a Republican candidate, 1942. He wrote a book called One World, advocating a world government. You can look at resolutions that were passed by probably 8 or 9 states calling for an Article 5 convention so they can change the Constitution so they can participate in a world government. And then, a few years later, George H.W. Bush, he addresses a joint session of Congress, and I'll never forget this. He said, what we have here, this was right before Operation Desert Storm. It was Desert Shield before it became a storm. He said, what we have here is a real chance at this what? New World Order. And he defined it as a UN as envisioned by its founders. Now, somebody wrote that speech for him, but George Bush is not a stupid man. You don't become head of the CIA. He's a Yale graduate because you're stupid. He may not have been the most brilliant guy that ever sat in the White House, but he definitely was a very smart guy. Guy could fly. He was a World War II hero. Guy knew what he was doing.
Right.
When he read that speech, it's funny. You can go on YouTube and find that 30-second part of that part. Behind him was Vice President Dan Quayle. He looked like he was on some psychotropics. He was just sitting there with a dumb look on his face. I would have been jumping, hitting the ceiling. What? What are you talking about, George? So he's kind of spilled the beans. That was their goal, was a new world order as UN is envisioned by its founders. And then when he was talking about Operation Desert Storm, he said, I would like to get congressional approval, but I'm going to a higher authority. That higher authority wasn't the Lord God. He was talking about the UN. So
I don't remember that part.
Oh, yeah. No, it wasn't during that speech. This was subsequent, I believe.
Okay.
But he said the UN is a higher authority. So since when did the UN become a higher authority to the United States? Well, in 1945, first of all, we signed off in a treaty, which should be null and void. And then Congress, in its infinite stupidity, passed something called the UN Participation Act. No, this was not a treaty. The House and Senate voted for this, signed in by Harry Truman, that said when the UN Security Council decides to send soldiers somewhere, we have to send them. So the declaration of war, which is a power of Congress, Article 1, Section 8, has become nullified. And we haven't not that we should declare war because we should declare war, but it should be up to members of Congress. And the founders gave that very good reason. That's an awesome power to have. We shouldn't give it to a handful of the Security Council who are unelected and usually despise us. They're not working for the best interest of the American people. Korea was a UN war. We're still over there. It never ended. We had a stalemate. It could have been ended a short time. I actually had a friend of mine who's now deceased that was in the room when Incheon was being planned. And the reason why it was so successful.
Wait, what's that, Incheon?
The Battle of Incheon was MacArthur's incredible invasion of this peninsula that pushed the communists pretty much out of Korea back in, I think it was 51 or so.
Which would have probably just ended the war along with. Didn't he want to bomb? He wanted to bomb some bridge and just stop the Chinese communists from coming over.
Exactly.
He was fired because
he wanted to win the war. He didn't get the memo. But what happened was, in the room, one of his aides said, "Mr. General, you should tell the UN because the UN was responsible. There was a UN Undersecretary for Security Council Affairs. He happened to be a Soviet national, and it was another one. It was this man. I forget his name." And he said something which I can't say in a family program about the UN. So the UN had no idea he was doing it. So therefore, Stalin was completely surprised. The Soviets and the Chinese communists had no idea it was a major threat.
So in his war room, so to speak,
yep,
someone said, "Hey, you should talk to the UN about this and get it approved or what have you."
Right, exactly.
He said, "Gosh darn it, to the heck with those."
He said Dag-Nab. Yeah, Dag-Nab.
Dag-Nab, I think that's, and how did it get back to, or were you saying that he was supposed to appeal to the Soviet national?
The title was the Undersecretary for Security and Political Affairs, I believe.
Oh, so was the guy in the room or the guy?
He was supposed to report to him and say, "This is our plan."
Okay, and then he didn't. Which, of course, why would we tell one communist about the plan that we're going to do to wipe out your little communist enclave here in Korea?
So the attack was a surprise to the White House, and it was a surprise because the White House would have told the Soviets as well. So it was a major surprise. And of course, element of surprise is the most important thing you need to have a successful invasion or a successful
Isn't that
battle.
something? And listen, you just throw that out there, like you would have told the White House would have told them as well, and that's because of our so-called treaty with the United Nations, and the United Nations is in a relationship with the Soviets, and therefore everybody has to know. Meanwhile,
That's right.
war is going on between these two superpowers, clandestinely or ostensibly to rid the world of some kind of tyranny. But meanwhile, we've got a general who has kicked ass in the South Pacific and is about to do the same thing again, and he's being told not to do it, and he gets fired for ultimately wanting just to end it in a couple weeks.
Try to win a war, and that's what he was trained at West Point. But that's no longer has not been the objective. But we saw the same thing in the first Gulf War. You remember General Schwarzkopf? He said,
That's right.
He's going to Baghdad." And I remember when I heard about this, I said, "Oh, you didn't get the memo, General." And he was I don't think he wasn't dismissed, but he was sent back to the U.S. So
wait, we got to finish Korea. So what I remember is then he and what I think was the thing that cinched it for MacArthur. Tell me if McCarthy, excuse me. MacArthur, right, not McCarthy. MacArthur was, he said, "I'm going to go bomb the hell out of this place so we could just stop the Chinese communists from coming over. When that happens, we'll basically smoke them out little by little because they're going to run out of munitions and people." And
that's right.
And when he refused to listen to the direct order, Truman said, "Well, sounds like time for you to retire."
That's right. Yes, exactly. He was recalled, fired.
Do you remember who got put in his place?
Well, eventually it was a man named Mark Clark. Mark was a patriot, General Mark Clark. He was a patriot. He was in the he was in Italy during World War II, the Northern Italy's Fifth Army, I believe. He actually made a comment that he said, "I have the dubious distinction of being the first American to sign a stalemate." He knew Korea was a stalemate. The war did not end. There was no clear victory, except the communists got North Korea and the South Korea, so they had two separate countries. And we're still dealing with that today. We still have soldiers there. We have this crazy, he's probably not as crazy as people think, but you have this communist madman that's reduced that country to third world poverty and has become a threat.
So did Clark just basically do what he was told? He wrote out and did his orders and told the UN secretary what he... Son of a gun. Okay, so then you were talking about Schwarzkopf. And so Schwarzkopf, your understanding of him was he was the real deal. He's going to go in there and kick some ass. And he was dismissed or he was relegated?
Yeah, he actually said, I remember when it happened, he wanted to go into Baghdad. He said they got out, the mission was to get him out of Kuwait. The Iraqi invaded Kuwait, get out of Kuwait. And they could have went to Baghdad and put this guy out of business. But no, that's not your job. You've accomplished your objective. You got him out of Kuwait. Now you can come home. And then we were back there another 10 years later. Right?
Well, same thing reminded me of Patton, who Patton said, "Look, we're here. These communists are horrible people. They're ridiculous. Let's go get them." And then suddenly, he got dismissed in another way.
And by the way, at our summer camp, we do have classes on the United Nations that cover some of this material. Some of it not in great detail. We do have advanced classes for people who have a better understanding. But for people that are just coming in, we'll give a class on the UN. And we'll contrast the UN chart, some of its history, who its founders were, guys like Alger Hiss. Now, to most people today, Alger Hiss, who's that guy? Well, he was a Soviet spy. He was a upper middle class man of privilege, went to Columbia University. You'd think he would love this country. He was a law clerk for Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Eventually became an advisor to Roosevelt. And at Yalta, there you see Joe Stalin, you see Churchill, and you see Roosevelt, and behind him is Alger Hiss. I know what kind of advice he's giving. He's probably say, "Hey, Frankie, let Uncle Joe have whatever he wants," and he did.
Okay, so let's make the distinction too between, there's sort of the, as soon as people hear the word conspiracy, it's tinfoil and aliens. But there's a distinction between that and history that's come out over the years, or actual admissions, like the people who created the Federal Reserve. They kept their mouths shut for a little while, and then they write great stories in time.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
Because we published something about that.
We got to make sure we finish Alger Hiss, because I want to know about that.
Okay, good. All right.
Okay, we'll come back. I promise we'll come back to the Fed. How can we not do the Fed? Okay, so Alger Hiss. So is he like overtly, truly, like, is it part of like typical national or world history that, Alger Hiss was a spy, and we know that now.
Yeah, well, what happened was he was found guilty of perjury. The statute of limitations had run out on actually espionage. I think it was in the early 50s. A man named Whittaker Chambers, who had been a member of his communist cell, exposed him. And he spent, I don't know, a couple of years in jail, lost his license to practice law. He eventually got it back. But he was a spy. He was a Soviet agent. There was no question about that. But the problem is statute of limitations, so I think 7 years or whatever it was, 5 years. So he went to jail for lying under oath, denying that he was a communist. And there were a number of communist cells, and there were at least 3 in the U.S. government. People don't want to hear this because they think it has no validity. But, you know, and it's interesting, too. It wasn't just that they stole secrets. We give them a lot of technology. We give the Soviets a lot of technology. In fact, one of the best books on the subject, written by Anthony Sutton, called National Suicide. Then he wrote a series of books. So if you just do a search for Anthony Sutton, and we actually have a video of his. It was an interview he did in 1972 about this book called National Suicide. He was a professor at the Hoover Institute. And I interviewed a younger colleague of his. They said he called him the Hoover vacuum because he just researched and he would just he didn't want to just write a book with a couple of footnotes. He wanted to be sure he got all of the bases covered.
And that's important when you talk about this stuff that's sort of like alternative history that people are thinking you're crazy as soon as you divert from the norm, you know, the party line.
Well, you know what's interesting? I used to think that I was in Germany for a couple of years as a soldier in NATO, the U.S. Army, and I saw some of these things, and I couldn't understand it. And then I read a few books, and I said, now I read a book by Gary Allen, the man behind the mask, about Richard Nixon. I said, now I understand why things were the way they were when I was in Germany. I remember talking to some senior NCOs. I'd say, gee, our equipment is junk, the morale's bad, half the people here are addicted to drugs. We know that the Warsaw Pact nations are much better trained than we are. They have better equipment, and we're basically sitting ducks. And they said, and we were a nuclear unit too, tactical nuclear weapons. And I remember the old first sergeant major said to me, Shurtleff, just chase the German girls, drink do your duty, drink the beer and go home. I said, yeah, okay, but I love this country. I got to say something. I can't just sit back and watch this and not take a stand. I take it. But when you're an E4 and E3, there's not a whole lot you could do, you know.
Which E3 is what, a corporal?
A private E4 is corporal specialist, yeah.
We'll do the translation for the civil right there. All right, so Alger Hiss, wait, there was something else. I don't want to go to the Fed yet, but I want to finish the little ditty on the United Nations too, because
by the way, there was a book about Alger Hiss. It was written by a man named Weinstein. His job was to prove him innocent, and he just the opposite. I forget what it was called, but his name Weinstein, Alger Hiss, and there was a title to that. So here was a guy that said, "I'm proving this guy innocent," and the facts he had to change his position based on the facts that were presented.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to touch UN, and then I actually want to ask you about McCarthy, because I know a few people who are passionately adore the man and think that he was just crucified for nothing. And then, obviously the party line is, as soon as you mention him, it's like, oh, he's a crazy chasing communist. And I think there's also something to say about communism killed 100 million people in China, killed 60 million people in Russia. And, what whether you like it or not, Hitler said communism, socialism, or Nazism, National Socialism are the same thing. So there are 200 million people dead because of this ideology, where people were tortured, murdered, women were raped, and
people wear the Che Guevara I saw a T-shirt, a picture of Che. It says, "Communism killed 100 million people in 50 years, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt."
Oh, no way! Yeah, he was a scumbag, and people are wearing it like it's some sign against. He was a
racist too. He was a middle class white man, I think from Argentina, and he hated black people. And I see black people, like he's Brother Che, No, you got this guy wrong.
When he talked about gays and what do you say? I love the smell of gunpowder and blood. Like, okay. And like, let's kill the press. You cannot have a free press. How can I do all this stuff without? Yeah. So anyway, so the United Nations. So one of the distinctions that I remember when I was studying the United Nations was, in America, our rights are recognized that they come from a higher power, whether it's God or natural rights, but they transcend, my opinion, you and I today, next week. The rights come from something beyond us. Governments are put in place to secure those rights. and therefore they can't take them away. The United Nations Charter says you are, as you mentioned, they grant you rights unless otherwise prescribed by law.
Well, if you in 1948, the UN Declaration of Universal Rights, and if you read it, you have the right to a vacation, you have the right to travel, the right to marry, the right to religious freedom, the right to the right but the right to vacation. Isn't that cool? You could go on the Riviera if you live in, that's a right. You have, but then the next charter or the chapter, it says that except where prescribed by law, and anything contrary to the UN. So you can't get us out of the UN committee because you're in a UN controlled area because you're violating and they love to use the word enshrined, the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. So.
When you started naming all the rights that I have to a vacation, all that stuff, that's what has me be grateful for the 9th and 10th Amendments, though, of course, the Constitution is being assaulted at all levels. But where it says, look, if we forgot to mention that you have a right to a vacation, if you have enough money, by the way.
That's right. My right, but if I have a right to a vacation, but I can't afford to go to Florida this winter, then I have to say, hey, Ron, hey, Joe, hey, Peter, you got to pony up some dollars. Why? Well, Hal wants, but Hal, hey, I can't afford to go to. Too bad. This is the UN. You have to, just like healthcare being your right.
That's right.
I like what Rand Paul was speaking in Bernie Sanders was at the Senate when he said this. He said, what you're doing is you're making a slave of all the people in the healthcare industry. It's their job. I have a right to something, but then it's the government's job to provide that right, and they have to force people to do the tasks, right? Yeah. So I think we as a free people, we have, like you said earlier, we have obligations. I have an obligation to my family. I don't have an obligation to my, to Joe in Alabama, but I may want to help Joe from Alabama. And we are the most generous people in the history of the world. You see someone gets hurt, someone loses their home, and you see these GoFundMe. Next thing you know, there's thousands of dollars. People are offering them to scholarships and helping them out, building homes for them. Our friend Willie Soon, you met Willie at camp last year, and he's returning. He said that and he's been all over the world. He's from Malaysia, left there when he was 14. He said only in America will something like this happen. Generosity, the goodness of the American people. Now, not to say that everybody in other parts of the world are all a bunch of bums. No, stingy. No, but it's a different attitude here.
Well, there's a mindset too of, and you sound like a fool if you start naming all the things that you do or I do that makes a difference out in the world. So both of us can not say anything like that. But the point is if you appreciate yourself, if you have a sense of, I didn't create all this, other people gave to me, you do good for yourself, you see other needs, you find people who can't do for themselves, they have good intentions, or they have a common mindset or a common spiritual thread, whether it's, of a religion or just a general mindset or philosophy, you see a need, there's an inclination, there's a desire that we all, I think, have to do something with that. And I can't speak, I'm not French, I'm not German, but sort of the water that I know that I swim in is I watch other people do things to help. I mean, you and I have helped each other, and yet we live a couple hundred miles from each other.
That's right.
And if there's something that can be done, and it's within the realm of that I don't hurt my family too severely in helping yours, then we do something with that.
That's right.
How much could it be better than that?
That's right. Actually, when it comes to there's a healthcare program called Good Samaritan program.
I've heard about that.
And we need to look into that, my family, where I think you pay up a certain amount to get in. And then I have a bill, my son needs an operation. Next thing you know, you're getting checks from all different parts of the country.
So that's a Christian, I'm not, that I'm not a Christian, that I go to a church and all that. I know you got to sign on. In fact, I was talking to a doctor friend of mine about this because he was talking about, well, you can mention Dr. Kishore. He and I were talking as well at camp this past year. But with Obamacare, and I'm not sure which provisions are not in place anymore, but we were talking about these organizations that have, a lot of them have been shut out of business, which were voluntary association, where I wouldn't have to have insurance, but you, me, and another 400 families sign on, and we each give $100 a month, say if we have more than 2 kids or whatever, to it. Off the money goes to somebody in need. That it showed up in the newsletter that said, oh, Sally Ann in Arkansas needs this thing. So we know I'm writing a check to another Christian, or if it's not a Christian organization, it's another individual that is of a similar mindset or what have you, off to them. And you know you're helping Sally Ann. There's a connection now with your charitable donations. And like you said, if there's no need for your family for 2 years, well, then you just gave a lot of money away to people who you could help. And when your family does have the need, like you said, checks come flying to you.
Well, the thing is, they call it a health insurance, but it's not when you're healthy, you don't need it. It's only when you get sick or you get hurt, then you need it, right?
Right.
And the idea is that you never need it. Or the reason why the system is imploding is because everybody's going to get, for checkups and for these minor things. Could you imagine if your car insurance included oil changes and battery charging? You know that the cost of all these things will go up astronomically because it's third party paying for it. It's not coming out of my pocket. See. The closer you are, I took my daughter to the emergency room. One of my daughters, she had a broken finger a few years ago. We get bills from 8 different entities. Well, wait a minute, this group, this person, that person. We don't know we don't know any of these folks. We just knew the doctor that x-rayed us or the emergency technician. And I said, this is insane, And the problem is that, the closer you are to anything, the better, whether it be your food source or the healthcare you're getting, all these third, fourth parties, and it's a lot easier to build a third party than it is to build the individual. So that's why the system is so bad. It's all those mandates. It's all the government mandates. The government made a mess of it. And in my opinion, Obamacare was designed to fail. So they say, well, look, we tried. The next thing is single payer. Well, single payer, does that mean just me? No, it means the government pays.
Yes.
And it means that everybody in the health industry is basically an employee of the
government employee. Yeah,
that's right.
So, that's crazy. I mean, obviously that the mandated, what was that called? Mandated
coverage.
That's gone. Obviously, is a good thing. But
it's interesting too. We should be responsible for our own lifestyles.
Right.
I shouldn't expect you to subsidize my health care if I happen to eat junk food every day.
Tide Pods.
I don't exercise. I drink 2 6-pack. I don't, but I'm just saying I did. Or maybe I like to jump out of airplanes. Not with the best parachute. Okay, you want to do that? That's your business, Hal. But now you get hurt. You get sick because of your lifestyle. I have to cover that through this healthcare system.
That's right.
You see. So you should be responsible. Hey, look, I smoked heavily all these years. I like to smoke. Now I'm sick. I don't expect Joe from Alabama and Peter from Arkansas to pay my insurance. I gotta do it on my own. I gotta be responsible for my own actions. And then the government says, oh, look, you're getting this great government care. You don't want to. We're not going to let you smoke. Or we're not going. You can't do this and you can't do that. So then more and more restrictions.
Well, and so it's funny that you say that. I think if you just whip that out to the average person, they're like, well, why would the government tell you not to smoke? How can they possibly? And I remember, I don't remember the name of the Supreme Court case. You might, but it reasoned. It may have been 20 years ago. Maybe it's more now. It reasoned that if the government, the federal government, finances it, it also can control it.
That was that has something to do with Social Security, I believe. That was probably an older. I can't remember the decision, but basically, that's right. And it makes sense. If I'm paying for something, I better have some say over it.
If you're going to give me $500 because I'm having tough times, you're going to kick my ass if I go off on vacation.
Or you go out and buy lottery tickets.
That's right. Bro, it's not going to go.
Unless you win a couple and then give me some of that back.
You're not going to be happy.
That's right. And that's, it's interesting too. The word charity, it's actually a word for love. The word is also tough love too. I mean, you need to help people, but if you realize that money you're giving them isn't going to, we've been examples of that now, in our immediate extended family where, you know what, we're actually enabling you. We're not helping you now. So we're going to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Tough love. Government doesn't care. If you're a government agent, your job is to get more clients. They're not trying to get you out of that housing project. It's interesting in South Boston, which is at that time was predominantly white community. It had housing projects that were all white. Mm-hmm. And the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, came in, and we're very proud of the fact that now black people are living in the South Boston housing projects. So we're advancing our race by getting them into a project in South Boston. I remember writing a letter. I said, what? This is insane. How do you help people? Getting black people where it's going to be somewhat of a hostile environment, that's advancing them? You get them out of housing projects, not put them in housing projects. That's how you advance people,
That's crazy. What would their perspective have been? Because obviously they weren't thinking that per se. What was their perspective that it was moving up?
That's how they look at. That's how they look at success. I don't know. And that was probably about 30 years ago, when they were making it like this was a major thing in the Boston chapter of the NAACP. We're able to get black people to move into a housing project, a government project in South Boston. In fact, I think that was the first one in the world. I remember working with a man that lived there, I think 3 or 4 generations. And he had it was like a Taj Mahal, his little apartment. He was bragging about it. You go into the place and it stinks you go in the hallways, it stinks of urine, graffiti, but his little Taj Mahal. And I said, look, I got to work overtime and pay your rent? He got very indignant. What do you mean? I said, you're bragging about how little you pay because the government subsidizes your rent. You're making more money than I do. You're making time and a half. Your wife works. And you're paying, I'm paying for whatever I was paying in those days, 500 or 400 or 600. I can't remember. He's paying 100. I said, I'm paying your rent, and he just basically getting over on the government. And the politicians, okay, I have your vote for as long as I'm in office, you're going to vote for me because I'm making sure you get your little government largesse.
And that's a thing. And I don't know, I've been watching this stuff and studying this stuff for probably 15 years or so, but for some reason, it just clicked in a couple of years ago for me. I mean, it's crazy, but true that what politicians do is they make promises. I mean, you can see, okay, it's hard to even say Republican and Democrat now. I mean, I just think they're just so similar in so many ways. But okay, the Republicans are pro-business, the Democrats are so-called pro-the people. But if you're constantly taxing everybody to give special benefits to this group and that group and that group and that group, you are guaranteeing yourself a vote because I've gone and done these 17 things for all you people, for Christians, for blacks, for Asians, for whatever. And I've just bought myself a lifetime job with the government.
That's right.
It's crazy.
And that's why an understanding of how the Constitution is supposed to work is so incredibly important. And if we were to get back under the Constitution, that we would see the size of government be reduced by about 80% at the federal level. And we would see prosperity. Not everybody's going to share in prosperity, but most people will. And that's and the more government programs at all levels, the more freedoms we lose.
Well, and I think there's also, wouldn't taxes go down all over the place anyway, because how many state and local mandates come right from the federal government anyway? They're hidden.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
School.
Well, the federal government does cover most states at least 30% of their, but you see, if it's a program and say, I don't care because the federal government's going to pick that up. So, but when they'll say, well, just what, maybe we can't do this all of a sudden because the government's not going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the private sector can do a better job of it, and that will create real jobs. It will create, there'll be a supply and demand. It won't just be based on some government bureaucrat, but a real supply and demand.
That's just meting out this amount of money, this amount every year because it's another year versus addressing actual needs.
That's right.
So it was right before the chaos in 2008. So I'll just call it 2007. I'm going to get the numbers wrong by a little bit, but the local high school in my town in New York, they were going to vote to get, whatever it was, like 16 new buses, a massive Taj Mahal parking garage, and all this stuff. And there was a kid I went to high school with, and he and I were talking at the time. And no, it's not why I don't talk to him, but we didn't talk much to begin with. But we were in connection at that point. And he said, Ron, I really, I need some help with this because if we do this, if we can get, whatever it was like, if we can get $4 million to just raise taxes to the residents for an extra 4 or 6 million, whatever it was, this year, which is a huge amount for the town I live in. It's just
that's right.
Yeah. The government will give us the additional 15 so we can get these other things. And I'm not going to say his name. I said, dude, but if we don't need it, he goes, yeah, but the money might not be there in 2 or 3 years. I'm like,
that's right.
Don't need it, then why are you going to burden people with the 2008 model buses instead of the 2002 models that'll last another 15 years anyway? And it's the mindset.
And then you have to maintain it.
And you got to maintain
those buses. And just the same thing with police cars. The federal government will say, yeah, we want to fight crime. We'll give you 3 cruisers. It's a small town. We just need 1. No, you have to take 3 or 4. All right, we'll take 3 or 4. Now you're stuck with maintaining them and what have you. And it can really break a town budget.
So what's the, obviously the notion of, someone in Arkansas, again, we'll those people in Arkansas, we'll get them. They're getting taxed to give the city of Boston, right? Because it all goes up to a pool and it gets thrown back down here. How much gets lost in that process is insane anyway, right? But if the city of Boston says, look, we only need 20 new cruisers this year, like, no, we got to give you 30.
That's right.
What was the question I was going to ask about that? I lost the question, but it's just chaos. We can't be like Chombe and secede from chaos. I guess.
Well, the bottom line is that if we send people to Congress that understand the Constitution, that when Congress appropriates all the money,
right?
All the House of Representatives, all money bills must originate in the House. And they'll say, well, we got to build a bridge here in Bug Tussle, Tennessee. Well, that's not constitutional. Okay, we'll vote no on that one. Well, we got to send money to Boston because we got a lot of votes there, and our constituents, no, can't do that either. So they just vote no on this stuff. And, when I testified, we might talk about the Article 5 convention.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's a very bad idea. But some of these legislators say, well, what do you do? What's the solution? Like, well, I'm glad you asked because you didn't ask before. You didn't want to know the solution. Now you're asking me, like, you think this Article 5 convention solution? I said, first off, you as legislators, stop taking the federal money. That's the very first thing you need to stop doing. So you won't have the Common Core standards.
You're talking about at the state level. Stop taking federal money.
The state legislators stop taking the federal money.
Yes.
Because federal money means, so they say Congress is out of control. Yeah, but you like it that way. You've been doing it for not you, but for the 100 years, the state governments have been participating in this federal increasement of power.
That's right.
So stop taking their money, and then you have delegates. There are members of Congress go for every state. You've got 2 senators, and you've got depending on your population, anywhere between 1 to 50 members of the Congress, House of Representatives. So why don't you instruct them? I mean, they have no under any obligation to listen, get a resolution, but at least this is what we want you to do at the state level. Represent our interests, represent the interest of the taxpayer, and vote no on these things. They don't have to do that, but at least a bully pulpit. They have to come back home to the districts and meet with the opinion molders, the state reps and the state senators and the governor, lieutenant governor, and they're telling you to say no to these things. You better start saying no. You might not get reelected.
That's the thing, though, right? Is we all have an appetite to stop having our money spent, but we don't have an appetite to reduce receiving the goodies from Washington.
And that's exactly right. And it's interesting. They'll say, well, Congress has a 6% approval rating, except for my guy or my gal. I'll keep on. Well, then we're going to have this mess as long as you have that attitude.
Yeah.
And also, the president is the one that signs the Congress can pass any bill they want to, but the president has to say, okay, I'm going to sign this. And if he vetoes it, then it's going to be sustained by 2/3 in order for it 2/3 to override the veto. Yeah.
Well, okay, so it's funny. Neither one of us obviously are Bernie Sanders guys, but my understanding is that some deal happened that Bernie had to step down and let Hillary run. The people that are being offered up to us have been around a long time, this game. They're not strict constitutionalists. They're not into limited government. They're into whatever they're into. And of course, Trump he's a businessman. He's not a constitutionalist. He's not particularly savvy about the machinations of limited government. But Bernie Sanders would have just been a spendthrift, and Hillary would have been business as usual. I love the idea. And of course, in principle, the veto is a great and massive power to shut down unconstitutional behavior.
One of my favorite fractions is 2/3. The founders were brilliant. They gave us electoral college.
Yep.
So when the president is not chosen by the general election, it's chosen by the state by state electoral voters. So that's a great thing. And it takes 2/3 of the House and Senate to get a treaty. Then it has to go to the states to be, not a treaty, I mean an amendment. Then it has to go to the states for 3/4. So they made it very difficult to make changes because, something can come up and there's a lot of emotion, capriciousness of the what have you. Oh, let's change it. Let's do this. Let's do that. No, we can think about it, but it's very difficult. And it was meant to be that way for a good reason. And imagine if it was easy to amend the Constitution. There's been, I don't know, hundreds of proposed amendments. We would not be here. We would not live in a constitutional republic. We would have some kind of socialist quagmire if we amend the Constitution, if it was easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think about the CNN town hall debate was amazing. I mean, that just was a debate or conversation that was the first thing. As soon as I heard it was going to even exist after this horrible shooting in Florida, I thought, are you kidding me? You don't grab. I mean, you could just say it for what it was, but you also wouldn't grab 10 women who were recently raped in the last 24 hours and get them in a room together and ask what they think we should do about men out of control in society. Like,
just castrate all men.
You wouldn't get good answers, and you're not going to get, a rational conversation out of it. What you do with a person in that situation is you cry with them, you hold them, you listen to them, you care for them in whatever way they need until they can come back into a place of balance. But obviously, that's not that wasn't the purpose of this.
No, they want gun control. They want to have gun. That's the ultimate goal, is a disarmed population. That's the ultimate goal.
Which is great because Trump is Hitler. Give him all your guns.
Right, give him all your guns. That's right. Yeah. They see when the argument is all based on emotions.
Yeah.
My solution is, first off, do away with compulsory education laws. So in other words, you don't force to put your children into that dangerous, harmful environment.
Right.
Could you imagine if that
That's
school was, let's say if it was a business open to the public, and the place you walk in there and the floors are caving in, or people are giving you stuff that's messing with your brain, they would be sued. They would be in jail, out of business. But because it's a government-controlled school, I call them government indoctrination centers. That's what they are. And they come in there, and they're giving psychotropic drugs. If the boys and some girls exhibit behavior, they're not paying attention in class. So Big Pharma is doping these kids up, and they've been doing that since, I think, at least the late 80s, early 90s. These school shootings were almost never. In fact, the first school shooting happened in California in the late 70s. It was a girl. She went in there and shot. Yeah, she shot a couple of. I think she hurt 6 students and killed a police officer or 2. I can't remember the details, but almost all of these young people are under psychotropic drugs.
Is that true? So I've heard rumors about that. Is that so that these guys?
That's not a rumor. It's true. All of these people are under psychotropic drugs.
Was it true about this last kid as well?
Yes, it was true about this last kid and all the other kids. And it's almost like they must be on this stuff, and that's one of the symptoms. I mean, millions of kids are on this stuff, and so every so often they have these. You ever see a commercial for these things? And they'll say, "Well, here,
suicidal thoughts and
suicidal thoughts." Well, yeah, death. Like, gee, I want to sign me up for that. Give me a prescription, doc. I want to be suicidal, right? So it's a big bit. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to even talk about the whole idea of the government schools to begin with. Get your kids out of there, and that's, to me, that's the solution.
Well, okay, so recognizing that could be wildly revolutionary for a lot of people. Now, I homeschooled my kids for like 4 or 5 years, and then I got divorced, and that no longer was.
Is it wildly revolutionary to put your kids in a risk where somebody's going to come in and knowing that the people are disarmed in that school building, knowing that the policemen are told to stand down, or might get there too late? Yeah, sure, we'll get there, we'll mop things up, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time to, get off a couple hundred rounds. And I don't care what you use. You can use a Ruger. I get a 22 Ruger with 10 rounds. You get 5 or 6 clips. You go there and do a lot of damage in a short time.
That's the thing. People were talking about AR as if it's not. AR doesn't stand for assault rifle. It's what's Armalite rifle.
Armalite. It's named
Armalite. Yeah.
Makes it, yeah.
And the AR-15 is just a cosmetic look for what is a typical hunting rifle and a lot of other things. And when people talk about it, because I've had these conversations with people, well, we should get rid of semi-automatics, or they talk about fully semi-automatic. It's semi-automatic, right?
Right.
Which is you get a bullet for every finger pull.
Every time you pull a trigger, yeah.
Not every, but I mean, how many revolvers are there out there? There's probably 3 out of every 4 handgun out there is going to be a pistol, a semi-automatic, which you can do so much damage with that. And so shelf that for a second. The idea, of course, nobody wants to, well, I guess you're saying it's like if your child is compelled, he or she must go to the public schools. Okay, there's an issue there, not to even mention, I mean, I'm not into arming teachers, but, what to do about this. But it's interesting if I've got a friend who's an anarchist, which I didn't even know you could be an anarchist. Like, in other words, I'm so small government, I want there to be no government. And he's like, private security.
A stop sign's too much government.
He's like, yeah, it's oppression, man. It's like, don't do. He's a well thought out guy, but like, I'm like, dude, how can you? But he talks about, have just total like competition, create the best schools. And if you want to have the best football team, you skimp a little bit on security, and you guys are really focused on STEM, then great. And if you want safe and you pay for what in the market will actually
separation of school and state. You see, they talk about separation of state, church and state, but what about separation of school and state? Right, that's something that.
Answer me. I mean, I have my understanding as to why, but answer why. So the average person is think you're crazy. We need to have an educated. It's my responsibility to educate the future, and of course, we want our kids educated. So push back, you.
Well, compulsory education law started with a man named, in this country, Horace Mann. Horace Mann was a Massachusetts politician. He was from a Calvinist background too. His father was a Calvinist minister from Vermont.
Which is, just for people who don't know, is like a very conservative
theologically
Christian.
Theologically conservative. He went to Prussia in the 1830s and 40s, and he basically said, I've seen the future. The Prussians had a state-run school. Now, when the state runs a school, what's the philosophy that's going to be inculcated in that school?
Whatever the
status philosophy. It makes sense. If you're an Ayn Randian and you start a school, you're going to have a school that promotes the values of the Randian types, right?
Right.
If you're a Baptist and you're a Bible-believing conservative, it's a good safe bet that your school is going to reflect that. It should, right?
That's
right. If you're a Catholic, it should reflect the teachings of your church.
Right.
So if the state runs a school, it's going to have a status philosophy that the state, staten über alles, that the state, and Horace Mann believed that you can perfect man by education. That all of the evils of the world, and he had a lot of people who were his disciples, and Massachusetts was the first state. And by the way, there was, I think, we were just a generation away from the founders too. And the state law said that the children have to be in these schools so many hours a day for so many days. And initially it wasn't all that many. I can't remember exactly. But it took a while for the rest of the country to catch on. But by the 1880s, practically every single state had compulsory education laws.
But that's get your toe in the door. That's how you get.
That's right. And now it's it's interesting too. State legislators passed laws to say how many hours a day and how many days a year your children need to learn. Well, how do they know what my children need to learn? They have no idea. Some of them don't even have children. If you want to put your child in that school for 9 months, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, that's your business. But you should make a compulsory law. And we've had them on the books for so long, the average person said, wasn't it always this way? And it's interesting, too, our whole life, if you have children in public schools or even in private schools, your whole life sort of revolves around your children's schedule because the state said they got to be in there, or they won't be good little socialist students, or won't be students. Well, a man named Charles Bulfinch, he was a man who designed the great the dome, the State House in Boston. He did a survey, I think it was 1810, in the city of Boston. And he found that the city of Boston was like 90 to 95% literate. The children were literate. All of them had access to schools. Most of them were in schools, or at least, and they all had a good education. So the bottom line is we didn't need to have compulsory education laws. They weren't necessary. I can't imagine too many parents say, I want my kid to be ignorant and stupid. It doesn't work that way. Most parents want what's best for their children, and that means learning basic things, learning skills, and what have you. And in many cases, the schools are really they're just institutionalizing them. Instead of getting them out in the workforce, they're out there, in schools, and then they go to college and they have to go in debt, for $100,000 isn't that the average debt now?
I think
so.
That's
now
right.
You're in debt to the government or to government loans or to the banks. And is that really the best way? Is that the most sane way to go?
Well, I even so when I hear some of the things that my kids come home and they tell me that they learned and that they're being, taught and how they're being taught. My son one of my boys came back and he was having trouble with long division, and he's in 7th grade. And he said, "No, we don't have to."
That's the Common Core. That's the Common Core. Yeah.
And I said, "Wait a second. How are you not getting 30 of these a night?" And this wasn't happening like 4 years ago, and you know long divisions in your sleep you can do by the time you're in 7th grade. And so I sat down, we worked a few out and cleaned it up. But it's stuff that, when we homeschooled, they were solid on, and then you get it dumbed down. I remember I had a 5th grade teacher, Mr. Ivanella. He was totally old. He was probably like 65 when I was there. I mean, so he'd been around the block.
That's old.
Oh, he was an old timer, right? But he has to have us fill out our homework, every subject, what homework we had, and then at the end of the day, we would sign it, and then our parents would sign it that it was complete every night. 5th grade, hour and a half was a light night, hour and a half to 2.5 hours every single day. We knew we knew all our stuff. I went to 6th grade, maybe 10 minutes of homework a night. Now, I get that we're working within the concept or the idea of a public school in which you would have homework when you come home, which is another conversation. But the idea of being rigorously drilled to know things and understand you got to get that, igneous rock is this, and, a couple things, and let's sing a song about it. And then, let's play a game for the rest of the day. It's like, how much time is being wasted in school? And you said something a moment ago is, one, how do you know how much, what do you know that my kids need in particular? And how do you know about how much time they need to understand this thing that you say that they need?
That's right. Well, the Sylvan, I think it's Sylvan Learning Centers, Sylvan Learning Centers.
Yeah.
They'll advertise that they can advance your students, your child, in 1 month or 2 weeks. They can advance them a whole academic year.
Yep.
So if they make that claim, and they're probably good on it. So, well, wait a minute now. If my child's a 9th grade level math, and you're telling me that in 1 month or 2 weeks or whatever it is, that you can advance them a whole school year, well, what if I did it for 4 months?
Right.
You get 4 years in 4 months.
Right.
At pennies to the dollar. So that student comes out of there as a high school graduate level math, and he did it in 4 months. My dad went to a pharmacy school right after World War II. Every 6 months, part of the curriculum was to take the exam. He passed the exam in 6 months. He didn't have to go to school for 5 years, he was on the GI Bill. He was a World War II veteran. If you can pass the pharmacy exam in 6 months, why do you have to go for 5 years? And so, I mean, I think, there's a lot of skills you learn in the course of your life without having to get a little piece of paper that says that you sat in the classroom for so long.
I had a guy on, Hal, from there's a company called Praxis. Have you ever heard of it?
I have, yeah.
So I interviewed him about it, and it's basically a mentorship college alternative. And, I think, you knew that I used to be a bricklayer and all that. And, how do you learn to be a bricklayer? Well, you become an apprentice mason, which is a laborer, which means first you learn how to tend a mason. You learn what the mason's needs are. Mm-hmm. You learn how to fulfill them. Then you're allowed to pick up a trowel and a brick, and you lay them crappy for a while. And then little by little, you get it on the job training. And then you become useful. I didn't have to learn how to become an electrician before I learned how to lay a brick and do 17,000 other, things that took in the other direction. And what I love about what they're doing, and really I think what you're pointing to is go do the thing that you're wanting to learn, that turns you on, that lights you up, that articulates you authentically in the world, and live.
And then do you have a marketable skill?
I've got a skill that I could go anywhere in the world and do, and I have no piece of paper that says I can do it, but do you think anybody in Iraq, as I'm laying up a new building, wants to see a certificate? No, they want to see me put 200 block in a day. That's what they want to see.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's why Sam Blumenfeld, I've learned a lot from him. I was he was a mentor of mine, and I want to point back to the Blumenfeld archives. And he goes into the problems with compulsory education laws. He's one of the first ones to do this. In the early 60s, he was a editor of Grosset and Dunlop, the folks who did the Hardy Boy books and the Nancy Drew. I think they do. I think they still do them. And a friend of his, an attorney from New York, said, "Look, Sam, I'm starting a literacy group, teaching people how to read. And will you want to be a member of our board?" He says, "Well, why would you have to teach people what's the problem?" He said, "Well, the schools aren't doing it anymore." "What do you mean?" He said that you need to get a book called Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolph Fleisch, which was published in 1955 or 56. So Sam read the book and he said, "Oh my goodness, they've introduced this thing called Look-Say, the Dick and Jane readers, and you have a generation of dysfunctional or semi-illiterate people." And Sam, well, gee, they made a mistake. All you need to do is just let them know they made a mistake here and point them back to phonics, and everything would be fine.
Right.
And that was back in the 60s. And then Sam realized that there was a vested interest in dumbing them down. And he did the research. Why would they do that? Why would grown-ups, why would decent people want to dumb down children? Well, if you're a socialist like John Dewey and you want to have a socialist people, it's much easier to dumb people down than to keep them as socialists. So in 1898, John Dewey wrote an essay, and we actually reprinted it, talking about that we don't need a literate society. So they'll have their intellectual elites, and then they'll have the average working class just know enough to do the basic skills. And they introduced that in the schools first off, they did it in an experimental school in New York City. That's where the Rockefeller brothers went. I can't think of the name of the school offhand. And these guys are all functionally illiterate. They said, okay, folks, now we're going to introduce it to the rest of the world, the rest of the country.
Moving now, how does this even happen? How in the world does this happen? And I wanted us to actually check in with, too, in 1955. If I'm not mistaken, before 1950-something, whatever it was, America was like #1 in mathematics and science and then
pretty much a lot of the categories we were definitely up there. Yeah.
And then we started pouring money in at the federal level, and then our education just tanked. It went off the So who? This is where people start getting sideways. Is like, oh, they. Who's the big they? A group of conspirators. But you just said that this was rolled out consciously some time ago, and kind of like the acceptance of. Everybody should go to school. It's compulsory. It's always been this way, hasn't it? Well, it wasn't always, but those people died off, and now it's the common sense.
That's right. That's right.
This same thing you're saying was the case where phonics was the common sense. Then this other stuff got introduced. It went through its point of probably resistance and people arguing about it, but then it just became the norm.
Well, interesting. The man who introduced the Look-Say was a man named Gallaudet. He was a pastor. He was actually, you heard of the Gallaudet School for the Deaf.
I've not.
He designed a way to deaf people to read, which was a good thing. Deaf people, obviously, if they're born deaf, they don't know sounds. They can't hear sounds, so they can't sound things out. They can't do it. So he created this Look-Say method, which worked to some extent for people who are deaf. And he thought, well, why can't we introduce this into regular schools? So I don't think he was an evil conspirator. But he got the ear of some people who were guys like Horace Mann and his little disciples, and they said, "Yeah, let's try it." They actually tried it in Boston in the 1840s for a couple of years, and it was so bad they rejected it. They said, "This is not doing what it's supposed to do." They got rid of it. Well, John Dewey went to the Soviet Union, then to Stalin in the 1920s under Stalin. And he had so many disciples and Russian disciples that thought his program was great. Stalin kicked him out, and he said something to the effect, he said this, of course, in Russian, but he said, this is okay for corrupting capitalist countries, but we don't want it here. So the Russians never adopted Look-Say. Why? They had complete control of what was being taught, and they wanted to make sure that their slaves could read the propaganda, read it very effectively. Stalin put Dewey's Russian disciples, sent them to Siberia. We don't have that luxury here, and he kicked John Dewey out. And John Dewey came here, and he influenced others, and the Dick and Jane readers, and so forth. And and I remember learning the Dick and Jane readers in the second grade, and I had a lot of trouble with it. I couldn't do it. I was functionally illiterate. The teacher said to my mom, "Teach him at home." My mother taught me the only way she knew. She was born in 1920, right? Phonics. So I became a pretty good reader. From being at the low level, I became one of the top students in that class because I could read.
Okay, what I can't quite grab. I mean, I'm willing to make the leap. I trust you, but what I don't get is, so John Dewey gets kicked out of the Soviet Union, and they're like, "You're smoking. Get out of here. Don't ever come back." And he comes back. Whose ear does he have, and what is his?
Well, he did get support from the Rockefeller brothers, the Rockefeller Foundation. They loved him.
After making two of them illiterate, he's.
I don't understand it. In fact, who was it? Nelson, your governor, your late governor.
That's right.
He was functionally illiterate. He had a good memory, but if he had Sam Blumenfeld's Alpha Phonics, he would be able to teach him to learn English, read properly.
I learned phonics. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. Okay, so wait, but I still want to hurdle something. Is you can't come out of the closet and go like, hey, I'm going to try to subvert your children. If I come over to your house, I'm like, hey, Hal, while I'm over there, I'm going to try to teach your children the virtues of, this occult magic.
Well, what John Dewey did is he started these teachers' colleges. Columbia University got money from the foundation, the big foundations, Rockefeller, and so he trained these people. And within a short time, there's a book that came out recently called Crimes of the Educators. And it goes into how these prominent pioneers, these Deweyites, were able to, within a short time, take over the teachers' colleges, and their philosophy prevailed.
So it's not a group of insider conspirators. It's a group of people who've been taught a certain way and are indoctrinated to believe a certain thing, and then they go out and perpetuate it.
That's how it works, yeah.
Slimy.
So I'd recommend the book, and actually you can find it as a free download on our website, Camp Constitution.
Is it Crimes of the
Sam
Educators?
Blumenfeld arcade, but it's not. I'd rather get the hard copy. It's a good read. There's also a chapter on the creation of a black underclass, and Sam Blumenfeld, that was co-authored between Sam Blumenfeld and our friend down in Florida, mental block. It'll come to me. It's a great book. Alex Newman. Sorry, Alex.
Oh, that's right. I knew.
Yeah,
I met
Alex
him.
Newman. Alex is a much younger guy, and Sam was his last book he wrote, and he goes into the history of this, the history of this problem. And there's a great chapter on the black underclass, the creation of a black underclass. And Sam used to offer his services to. He'd write letters to the mayor of Newark, mayor of Chicago, mayor of Boston, mayor of Albany. He said, give me your worst school, the worst public school in your jurisdiction, and I will, within a few years, make it the best school. Nobody took him up on his offer. But a woman in Chicago proved it, Marva Collins. They made a movie about it.
I remember. Okay, yeah.
And,
what was the
Sam
movie?
knew her. Sam knew her. I think it was called the Marva Collins Story. I think had some well-known, Cicely Tyson, some well-known actors in there too. Morgan Freeman, I think, was in it. He's in all the good ones, right?
Yes.
And she took these students that were almost incorrigible and turned them into very, very good students, exceptionally high-performing students. It was her method of teaching, her method of reading. There's actually a group in Boston. It's called We Are All in This Together. It's an acronym. And they use Sam's alphaphonics, and it's an adult. Like a learning center. It's for adults who didn't get this stuff in high school, and they're learning computer skills, but they're learning how to read properly first. So he's taking people who are functionally illiterate. I mean, there are people that get by, they can read the sports page, they can read signs, but to actually sit there and digest something that's instructional, they can't do it. So they can get by. You can get by without, to a certain extent. But they can't get good jobs because most jobs you require some level of reading and understanding. So they adopted his alphaphonics, and these people, and but not, you get an adult, after 2 or 3 months of this learning, they're all set. They learn what they need to learn, and
that's awesome.
That needs to be replicated all over the country. And we're doing this to, like I say, with our alphaphonics. And we have some plans. We have a couple of places that are used as learning centers. We have one in Maine, and we're going to hopefully in a few years start one in the greater Boston area as well.
I want to hit the Article 5, which is just the con, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that is scarier than all get out. And there's a couple of things I want to make sure we talk about too. But why don't you tell me with the Article 5?
Okay, when we speak of Article 5, in this reference, we're speaking about Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. And under Article 5, there are two ways to amend the Constitution. One of them is where 2/3 of the House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate, agree on an amendment, then it goes to the states. And either 3/4 of the states' legislators, or if Congress decides to have ratifying conventions, then they'll appoint ratifying conventions in the states, and they will then debate the amendments. The other way is a method that we've never used under our Constitution. It's called the Article 5 Convention, sometimes a con. There's a group called Convention of States, and they use the term, and they say one isn't the other, but a con, Article 5 Convention, what have you. Well, this is where 2/3 of the states have to apply to hold a convention, and then Congress has to actually call the convention, and then they will sit down at this convention and propose amendments. And whatever amendments come out will under the Constitution. It had to be agreed upon by either the 2/3 of the 3/4 of the state legislators or 3/4 of the ratifying conventions. But we have some serious problems with one. Although it is in the Constitution, James Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, was very concerned that there were 2 states that had proposed to have an Article 5 convention. He said it would be fraught with danger because of the political climate. Now we're talking 1788 and 89. I don't think the climate is any better since then.
No.
So we also concerned that since it's a sovereign entity in many respects, we had one convention that was under what was the Articles of Confederation, which was our first constitution. Under Article 13 of that, all of the states had to agree upon any changes. So they didn't change the articles; they wrote a new one.
Right. They abolished it.
Right. Now they'll say, "Well, are you trying to say that they exceeded their mandate?" Well, they exceeded the instructions they got from the state legislators, yes, but they represented the people. And they said, you want us to, to make changes to make this Constitution, but we can't do it with the current Constitution. But we represent the people. We don't represent state governments. We don't represent the Congress at the time. So they gave us what I think was a brilliant document. And only instead of having all the states, they only had 9 states, you see. And it became a great, I think, the greatest government document in the history of the world. And if more countries adopted our Constitution, I think you would see a lot more freedoms and so forth. And people understood it.
Right.
So we have some serious issues with having a convention. First off, the type of delegates would probably not reflect the same mindset of the founders.
Right.
I would imagine that I would say 5 to 6%, maybe 10% of the people at this convention. We don't know who the delegates will be. Will they be under the influence of special interest? Will they compromise? And I'll give you an example. One of the men recently hired by a convention of states. This is an organization. I use the word conservative. They're supposed to be conservatives. They hired a former senator, Tom Colburn, Dr. Colburn from Oklahoma. And he's a very likable guy. I met him. We had testified against Article 5 in New Hampshire. In fact, they just shot it down 17-1 in committee, which was a phenomenal, complete flip-flop in the last 2 or 3 years. But Colburn when he was a senator, he voted for the Bush bailout. This was at 08, I think, 09, okay. The big TARP, trouble. So when he testified last, so I couldn't kind of go after him. Now, here's a man that I would say is an honorable man. He had a relatively good voting record. It wasn't perfect, but I'll take him in Massachusetts. I'm sure you'd take him compared to the people you have represented.
Yeah, Schumer and Gillibrand.
But he failed. He voted. This probably was his most important vote he ever took, and he failed miserably. He let his constituents down. He let the country down when he voted in favor of TARP. He actually told me he regrets the vote. He admitted it was wrong.
Wow.
So would you trust him to go to a convention, an Article 5 convention, where they'll be posing him amendments? They may change the mode. And also, who the delegates will be and how many delegates will there be? New York, will it be one vote, one state, or will it be based on electoral votes? So it's possible that New York might have how many members of Congress? 35, 37, something like that?
Actually right, yeah.
So I would imagine with the political climate in New York that you're not going to have too many Ron Pauls, right? Or Ron Pauls.
Yeah.
You're going to have like the governor, Como. You have a lot of Comos there.
That's right.
Massachusetts, we've got we got 11 delegates, right? Most of you might have one Republican who'll be our governor, Charlie Baker, is a left-wing governor. He should have a big D beside his name. He's got an R, but it should be a big D. Then you have California. You've got a crazy governor there. He's probably worse than our governor here, Brown. And you've got over 50 electoral votes. So these people are going to be at a convention. You really want those folks without mindset messing with our Constitution?
Well, the thing I understand too, Hal, isn't it once they're there, they can propose and vote on and
that's right.
anything.
That's right. Yeah, you can't limit it. There's a notion that you can have a limited convention. So the resolution might say a convention for the purpose of a balanced budget amendment or term limits or whatever the case may be. But the Constitution in Article 5 doesn't say anything about limiting a convention. So the delegates and legislators say, yeah, we want this to be one thing. The minute you seat your delegates, yeah, I know what the resolution says, but that's not the operant aspect of that. The legislators don't control us.
Right.
They can't set the agenda. They may think they can, but they don't. Congress sets the agenda under Article 1, Section 8, Necessary and Proper Clause. Congress may make the rules, but how are they going to enforce the rules? Hey, we're our own entity. And what are they going to do? They're going to send in and arrest us? They've been trying to pass these wayward delegate bills. So on one hand, they say, oh, it can't be a runaway. It's by nature a runaway. And then they say, well, in case it's a runaway here, we'll have these wayward delegate bills. But wait a minute, now you told me you couldn't be. Now you're saying it may be. That's why you want to propose these. So you live in Massachusetts and you pass a wayward delegate bill. You sign it, and so you mollify the opponents of an Article 5. The convention's held, let's say, in Pennsylvania or Hawaii. Are you going to send state police? Oh, Hal Shurtleff is not going to vote according to the way they vote. So you got to send a state policeman out to Honolulu to arrest me, right? It's not going to happen.
No, so I think the thing that whenever I think about this or talk to me about it is when you see constitutional convention or anything, what's the other term for it?
Or convention of states.
Convention of states.
Yeah.
People run from it, scream, like, get away from it. You don't want that. You talked about how hard it is to create a constitutional amendment. Man, that is some tough work. And it was meant to be that way, like you said, because you don't want emotions. You don't want small-minded men and women to just vote themselves their own, to their own interest. And that's why you make it hard to do this thing. Once they can get over the crest, man, it's all open season. And maybe your rights don't come from a higher power, come from your natural, because you were actually born, they were given to you, or that they exist because you are of nature. No, they are given to you by the government, and if need be, they'll be taken away, or they'll become options rather than natural rights.
Some of these proposed amendments, too, they're talking about a balanced budget amendment. Now, that sounds pretty reasonable if you like limited government. Who would be against a balanced budget amendment if you're a fiscal type conservative?
Right.
Well, that sounds good. And when I first heard about it, I said, that's crazy. Who would be against this? Balanced budget doesn't mean a constitutional budget. That means we can still borrow money. We can raise the taxes. Hey, it's like your household budget. You go out and buy a couple of rare documents that you put on your wall here, behind you. You go out and buy a couple of flat screens. You buy season's tickets to the Yankees. Hey, as long as I got credit cards, as long as I got neighbors that are going to help me, I can balance my budget. But boy, I'm in debt pretty badly. So as long as they can raise taxes, they can print money out of thin air. Hey, could you put a call to old Ben and say, who's the head of the Fed now? That's not Ben.
No, it's not. I don't know.
Lady, I can't think of it.
Goldman
Sorry
Sachs.
about that. Yeah. Hey, we need to, we just need to get some more bonds here. We just need we got to cover a couple of $1 trillion here. Oh, okay, no problem. We'll handle that. So not only that, but the federal government covers a good chunk of the state's bills. Mm-hmm. So if these people go back and say, look, I'm trying to fight for limited government and I get a balanced budget amendment, well, guess what? Now 30% of that state budget has to be raised by the local people, by the state. We got to raise your taxes. So, you get what you ask for. It's not going to solve the problem. We need to have a constitutional budget, and that's not going to do it. Then you have term limits. And they say, well, if we have an amendment that limits the terms of these rascals, in so many years, they'll all be out. All the rascals will be out, but then the philosophy of the rascals will still be prevailing. So you're going to get rid of Bernie Sanders and get another socialist. You're going to get rid of a Kennedy and get another socialist in there. But what about the people like the Ron Pauls of the world that should be there, the Rand Pauls? You get rid of them too.
Right.
And you haven't solved the problem. You've got a permanent lame duck Congress. Yeah, you instead of you get rid of the big spender, but now you get the staffer now that's taking his place or her place.
That's right. So versus an educated population that understands limited government and freedom deriving from the individual who's taking care of his or her stuff, you're relying on the government for everything. And that's really the nature of socialism anyway, isn't it?
That's right.
You will take care of me because I'm incapable of educating myself or my children and providing food for the table and on and on.
There's we've got some really good videos on our YouTube channel, Camp Constitution, on this subject. We have a playlist or Article 5 convention. And we've got some folks. I've interviewed people like Edwin Vieira, one of the country's top attorneys. A woman, she goes by Publius Hulda. She's a former trial attorney.
Okay.
A man named Robert Brown, who's a constitutional scholar from Montana. He travels around the country. Incredible stuff to really get a handle on this. And thankfully, we've been successful so far in stopping it. And I don't want to be overly optimistic, but this session right now, 6 states have said no to this Article 5 convention. Some resoundingly. In New Hampshire, the state that had adopted, at least at the committee level, the last 4 years, this year 17-1 against it.
Crushed.
And all of the money. I mean, they're outspending us. I said $1,000 to 1. Someone said no, it's a lot higher than that. I mean, I had to borrow money from my son to get a tank of gas to drive up to Concord to testify, and get some photocopied of some handouts. And these people come into a 5-star hotel. They just flew in first class, and they got money to spare. But the bottom line is, I think the truth's getting out, and I think people are saying, nah, maybe this. And there are a lot of good people behind this too. I'm not saying they're all evil people. There's some that are evil. Cenk Uygur is one of them. Young Turks. Yeah, he's not a good guy, folks. He's behind us as well. He wants to have an Article 5. They want to rewrite the Constitution, make it dramatically very different.
I just know, I've seen him talk a few times, and at first I was really, wow, this guy's saying it. He's really, and I forgot what he was talking about that I really agreed with him on. And then I heard him starting to talk about conservatives. And look, all these terms mean almost nothing these days, but he was talking about conservatism in general, about small government, and he was thrashing it. I'm like, wait a second, dude.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. There's one thing I want to say about cons quick, and then I want to ask you a couple more quick questions, and we'll call it a show here. But
let's talk a little bit about our camp coming up too.
Totally. So con. Oh, isn't it? Am I mistaken to say that once a state says, "Oh yeah, we're into a con," and they voted for it, there's like an open call for it?
They can rescind. States have rescinded, yeah.
They can rescind. However, if they don't actively rescind, it's sort of like there's 20 states still have those open on the book, and they just have to get to another 12 states to
There's 28 states that have applications calling for a balanced budget amendment.
Okay.
However, a lot of these applications are very old. They're not all worded the same. We have to act like we're 6 states away. They need 34 states. There's 28. 4 states have rescinded all of their applications the last couple of years, or some of their applications. A lot of states have rescinded all of their applications all over the years, but we have to act like we're 6 states away. It may be less than that. We also have to get states that do have live applications over the years to rescind, and we've had some success doing that. New Hampshire, we got rid of all of them in 2010, and 2 years later, they had a so-called balance, one for a balanced budget. So they do have one live call, or an application, I should say is the right term. So that's something we have to hopefully the next cycle. Now that we'll kill all of these new applications. Now let's just get rid of this one, and we'll leave you alone. We actually have bigger fish to fry, but when the folks who want to rewrite or restructure, that's the term they use, restructure the Constitution, we have to oppose it. And our class at camp, I taught a class last year. It's sort of a brief. I only went into for about 20 minutes, and this is why we think is a very bad idea.
So give us a quick pitch on the on camp and what the.
Well, our annual camp, our summer family camp, is up August 5th to the 11th in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, at the city of Pittsfield. It's at a nice Christian campground on a lake. This will be the first time we've been here. We've got an incredible lineup, and hopefully you and your boys will make it this year. But we have a British Lord, Christopher Monckton, who was part of Brexit. He's an incredible guy. He's an expert on the climate issue, on the UN, and he has a love of our Constitution. Professor Willie Soon's returning, as he was there last year with his family. And we have Dr. Duke Pesta. Dr. Duke Pesta is of the University of Oshkosh in Wisconsin. He's one of the top critics of Common Core, and he'll be doing a few classes. He's coming in just for like 2 days. Then we have Chris Ann Hall, who's a constitutional attorney. She travels all over the country. Visit her website. She's got incredible insights on the Constitution. And then we'll have a guy by the we have Michael King of the Massachusetts Family Institute. Reverend Stevie Kraft. He's one of our regulars. The Rev, a good friend of mine. Guy that lives near you, Earl Wallace, Pastor Earl Wallace.
That's right.
So we have a really good lineup. We're taking field trips to the Battle of Saratoga and Battle of Bennington sites, Mount Greylock, which is the largest mountain in Massachusetts. Although thankfully we don't have to. We can drive up and drive down. You don't have to hike like in New Hampshire. We had this tough hike, and we did it in a half a day. But it was could be a little rough and brutal. But this one it won't be so bad. And and we have lots of recreational opportunities. There's a swimming and hiking and fishing, and there's a confidence course and volleyball games. And they have a wiffle ball field with a green monster, Fenway Park.
Is that right? I was going to say, it's a wiffle ball, because that would put me over the edge.
It's not 300 feet though. It's maybe like 100 feet, so it's a little easier.
Oh.
And it's a family camp, but we also have unaccompanied minors. And to learn more about it, visit our website, campconstitution.net. The rates are very reasonable. $350 is the high end. Mm-hmm. If your children are 13 and under, they get a nice discount. And we do have people, hey, I can't make it to camp, but I love what you're doing. Help us. We have sponsors. You can be a sponsor if you have a business or a nonprofit, or just make a donation to make our camp and keep me in the field. And so we can start more camps, and I get more shows like yours,
I think so. I want to just do like a total endorsement to say, if you're interested in it, if you want to send your kids, if you want to go as a family, I think
Can you read the sign behind me? I put up the sign here for the camp. Can you see it?
It's very clear. Is that where? Okay, good. Yeah. People can take a screenshot of it and get all the info. So listen, I want to actually say, so if you're a Christian, go. If you have any interest in being, having your children understand the principles of Americanism, go. It's an environment for you. And I want to say too, to those who are not like me and my boys, where I try to teach them the values of Christianity, the values of being a good man, the values of what I would say are standard ethics and Western thought. Really, they're cool and they're fine with whatever went down there. So it's not like it's, you're going to some place where you've got to be a Christian in order to attend at all.
Well, I would say it's a Christian centered, but it's not a Bible camp.
Good distinction.
Yeah.
What I'll say the boys really walked away with, just to kind of jump in and riff off of what I said at the beginning, is they were clearer on the context of the importance of self-government, the need for a small central government, so somebody isn't lording over you, telling you what you must do, what you cannot do, and saying that this is good, and accepting the notion that another man or woman can govern you better than you can govern you or your family. And to talk in greater detail about some of these things that our kids will never get exposure to, which is Willie Soon is an astrophysicist, to talk about global climate change and all these things from a very different perspective than we're usually given.
That's right.
You hear about the United Nations, and it's not just this innocuous group of people that operates peacekeeping missions around the world. And so, it's a really great environment. So anyway, check it out, everybody. And
you can look at, if you visit our YouTube channel, you can look at classes we've done over the years. And we don't want to have the same exact class every year with the same instructor. We want to mix it up a bit. And so we may have a similar class, but somebody else will be conducting it. So there's some basics we have to cover, like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but we try to bring in different instructors to cover it, so it's not the same notes we used last year or the year before.
That's right.
And a lot of the classes are PowerPoint. They move very, very nicely.
Yeah, they actually did. All right, a couple things I want to hit before we call it a day, my friend, is historic contributions of Black Americans. Before we got on, I mentioned to you that I've been a big Booker T. Washington fan for a long time, but I just discovered Frederick Douglass, and he's got a speech. He's got a few speeches that I got the recordings from Amazon. Ozzie Davis, who passed I think about 10 years ago, he recorded them. Wow. So what to the slave is the 4th of July? Wow. It is amazing. And I want to say something about that and get your comments on it. But he's also got one about the virtue of hard work. And he was a total bootstrapper. You become a better man.
He was a runaway slave. Yeah.
Absolutely. But his concept wasn't, now the government should do something for me, except for get off of my people's back. Be
That's right.
be consistent with your glorious Declaration of Independence and Constitution. What I really, this may show my prejudice or my, certainly my perspective is in that the first speech I mentioned, "What to the Slave," is the 4th of July. He goes, he's very humble and says, "Thanks for having me here," basically. Then he goes on and says, your country, your founders, great men. They were great in every way. I mean, he goes on and on and on about them. He says, of course, I might not, see them in his perfect light as you, but they were great in every way, and you should be proud of them. And then he turns and goes, "And America's sins stack up to heaven, and you are not living up to your promise." And what I love about that is it wasn't a finger wag from a place of, "You are evil. This is an evil document. There's nothing of value here. We deserve to be free." It was, stand up and be men and women worthy of being the children of your great founders who laid forth the foundation that we should all be standing on, which is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought about him in the last couple of weeks that I've been reading about him and reading his works. It's sort of like we have our founding fathers. And I think about him and a Booker T. Washington and some of these other guys that had to win freedom for the rest of the population as sort of the founding children to say, now we all have to live according to this. What is your take on the place of our Black heroes in our history?
Well, one of the things Black History Month just came and gone.
Right.
And I'm not a big advocate of a Black History Month or a White History Month or a Jewish or a woman. I believe all of these people made great contributions. Historically, unfortunately, when we read about a battle, we read about generals and admirals. We don't always read about the soldiers and the sergeants and the captains. But there were a lot of great men, and that's what we do at Camp Constitutional. Actually, I gave a class on it a couple of years ago, the Black Patriots of the Revolution. The Black American, it was with every single battle and every war, they were there.
Mm.
I just visited the college in Brunswick, Maine, where there's a museum, the Peary Museum. And who was with Peary when he found the North Pole? He had a black man, George Hansen. If it weren't for George Hansen, Peary would not go to the North Pole. In fact, today, more people know about Hansen than they do about Peary. It kind of changed a little bit, We learn about the Boston Massacre. And most people know who Crispus Attucks was, right? Because we teach about Crispus Attucks. And one of my favorites was a man named Prince Estabrook. He was one of the Lexington militia members that was wounded in the Battle of Lexington. And there's a gentleman who depicts him in the reenactment, which I've been attending for a number of years now. He's now in his 80s. We visit his burial site where he's buried, and we like to say this man answered the alarm. Then in the town there, right next to Ringe, New Hampshire, where our camp had been for many years, is a town of Jaffrey. And there was a man by the name of Amos Fortune who was a slave in Massachusetts, bought his freedom, moved up there, and he was a tanner. He had a great skill. And initially they ordered him out, which means they can't kick him out. It just means that the town welfare will not cover his if he needs anything. Within 2 years, he's a pillar of the community. And today there's an Amos Fortune Foundation, and his memory is treasured there. So there's a lot of these things. There's a man named John Langston, which an ancestor of mine knew. He helped him recruit soldiers for a black unit he was running. Just read his incredible book. He was born a free man in Virginia, and he became president of a college, and he became a member of Congress from Virginia. Just an incredible man. And even with all of the obstacles, some of these great men were able to, and only because it was the United States. That probably couldn't do it in other parts of the world. And unfortunately, when they do have, since the left controls the culture, they control most of the media. When you hear about Black History Month, you usually get most of the rascals that you learn about, the people that should not be so well known, the people that have not made great contributions. So I think it's important that we counter that with some. And if you visit our YouTube channel, I've done several shows on it. And one of my late friends who was an instructor at Camp Constitution was Dr. Mildred Jefferson. She was the first Black woman to graduate from Harvard Medical School, a pioneer in the Right to Life movement. She should be a household name. Philippa Schuyler. Philippa Schuyler was the daughter of George Schuyler, whom we have some information on. George was a former socialist, became a patriot, a brilliant, brilliant author and writer and lecturer. And I only found one. He did a debate with Malcolm X in the early 60s. I found that. In fact, Malcolm X YouTube channel, I downloaded, we put it on ours. Malcolm X is telling people on this show that it was the white man, that the European male, white male, that introduced slavery to Africa. He said, no. He said it was the Muslim that introduced slavery to sub-Saharan Africa. And in the Muslim world, now the black Muslims are a different group than the traditional Muslim, but Malcolm X was basically schooled by George Schuyler. His daughter, Philippa, was a concert pianist. She was a child prodigy. She played in front of the Queen of England, I think, or the King of Addis Ababa, the Emperor of Ethiopia, when she was a girl, and she was killed in Vietnam. And she was on a rescue, an orphan. She was the helicopter crash. It wasn't under enemy fire or anything, but she should be a household name in the black community, and very few people know who she is. So that's important, I think, because liberty doesn't have a color. And unfortunately, since the schools, most blacks go to the government schools, white liberal teachers, or blacks that have been taught by white liberals, they have sometimes a hostile perspective on what this country is about. And that's why it's important to reach out to the inner cities of America.
Well, you mentioned, so I was talking about, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, and, named a bunch of other people. It's a weird thing that we do where it's like we're almost...
Did you say Kurt Douglas or Frederick Douglass?
Frederick, I
didn't know he was black.
It's a weird thing that there's like a double standard. It's like, oh, those black people were so smart or they're so good. It's almost like they're toys. They're not toys, man. They're like you said, it's not about color. And here we are pointing out certain black people who have made a contribution. What I think is an important distinction here is you're not saying, or nor am I endorsing the notion of, oh, aren't they good black people who made a nice contribution? It's like, no, let's celebrate all people who are of liberty-mindedness, who are
That's
hardworking,
right.
who are principled. And if we're going to celebrate Women's Day, which it is today, or Black History, and put people up as standard bearers for their race or their gender, let's put up people who actually represent the ideal that we want to have more of in our communities, in our world. So, and I appreciate you mentioning those folks. Let's see, anything else before we go? All right. What else do you want to say, Mr. Shurtleff?
Well, how much time do we have left?
Well, it's all on us. I have 13 minutes for us to finish talking and then for us to hang up, wrap up for a minute, just the two of us, and go. So why don't we take like 5 more minutes?
All right. Well, I do want to talk about a little bit about our publishing arm.
Okay,
and
great.
Some of these things you can find on our website. I did hold up the Federal Reserve. I know you want to get into the Fed just a little bit. Now, the Federal Reserve Bank, when you say Federal Reserve Bank, you just told 3 lies. It's not federal, it's not a bank, and it's not a reserve. But
there's no reserves, yeah.
Well, a friend of mine, about 6-7 years ago, said, Hal, there was one of the attendees at this infamous Jekyll Island. This is where the bank was hatched. The Federal Reserve Act was hatched, Jekyll Island, Georgia. His name was Frank Vanderlip. He wrote autobiography a year or so before he died, 1935-36, and it was serialized in the Saturday Evening Post. Every week there'd be another chapter or portion of a chapter. He said, if you can find that chapter where he talks about his secret meeting at Jekyll Island, he said, I'll pay to have it reprinted. Well, okay, I went on the internet and I found every single issue in beautiful PDF except for the one that I wanted.
Oh, no.
The one, yeah. And then eventually I found one online, but it was so badly you couldn't even read it. So I said, okay, well, I put feelers out. Well, a friend of mine up in Maine went to a yard sale, and he said, Hal, I got that book you're looking for. The book was selling on Amazon for $1,500, by the way.
The
got it for about $2.
Post that had that chapter.
No, the book itself.
The book itself.
The autobiography. Okay. Yeah, which I think it was overpriced, to say the least. And then he got the magazine. And, it was in a nice little plastic cover. He gave them to me. I said, well, do you want them back? He said, because I'm going to have this book, it's going to have to be, the binder's going to be taken off if you scan it. He said, no, do what you want. They're yours. So we actually scanned the book. It's on our script page. And also, if you go to Camp Downloads, you should see it there. And if not, give me a call. but we reprinted the most important part is that one chapter.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the book is more like, growing up as a young kid in the farm. It's not bad, but what happened at that island, at that meeting in Jekyll Island? He said that we are as secretive, as furtive as any conspirators. It was very fascinating, this one little chapter. So we reprinted it. And I guess if you're a serious student of it, and we can actually, this is on Amazon. You can buy it for, I think, $3 or $4.
Oh, geez.
Postage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or you can go get a free download on our website. But it's about 20 pages. But if you're a real serious student, bless you, this is really good information on that subject. Also,
wait, before you do that, you got to contextualize. I've talked about it in other podcasts. I had a guy named you might know Anthony Davies. He's a professor at Duquesne, but he's an economist, and we talked about the Federal Reserve, as well as a guy named James Harrigan, who actually together they do a podcast called Words and Numbers, and they're small government guys. But we talked about the Federal Reserve, but the idea really being that these guys quietly, secretly made their way down from New England and New York City to set up a not federal bank, which isn't a bank, with no reserves, to basically, not even basically, to
control the money
America's
supply.
money supply.
Yeah.
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 And
there's a great book that I recommend to your viewers and listeners. It's called Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh yeah.
Now it's about 600 pages.
It's a beast, but it's a page turner.
But it's not written in some dull, dry economic. Usually when you get an economist to write a book, you're going to fall asleep. So you get a lay person, Ed Griffin, who has a good mind, and he put it in a very readable format. Yeah. I actually interviewed him when the book first came out, and that interview's on YouTube. Just put down Hal Shurtleff, Ed Griffin, and it should pop up.
Okay.
But he talks about how we had a gold standard, and we became the most wealthiest nation in the history of mankind within a short time. You think about it, from 1776 to by the early 1900s, that was less than 120 years. For some reason, when we had a gold standard, we would have all accomplished all this. And these folks they wanted to be able to kind of control things. So the big banking interests, so the Rockefellers, and were a big part of this. About 20% of the world's wealth was represented at this Jekyll Island meeting, as Ed Griffin points out. And when it was passed, it was interesting. The bankers knew that if our people, like for example, Aldrich, Senator
Nelson Aldrich, yeah,
that was the maternal grandfather of the Rockefeller brothers. If he sponsored it, it's going to look like he's part of the big banking interest. So they got people on the other side.
They were Democrats, right? They had Democrats.
The Democrats and the liberals.
So it looked like it must be something.
Although the Democrat Party's changed just a little bit since then, but it was the Glass Act, right?
Yep.
So they get this guy Carter Glass. Well, he's an outsider. I'm against the banks, you see, and they got their bill passed, and it was the father of Charles Lindbergh Sr., who was a congressman from Minnesota. He said, when this passes, you have created the most gigantic trust in the history of mankind. He said, booms and busts will be artificially created. And as Ed Griffin pointed out, the Federal Reserve Bank has become a war-making entity because wars are expensive. You can't just say, hey, let's have a war. Let's mobilize 5-10 million people and this and that. Who's going to pay for it? Well, if you print money out of thin air, as we do with the Fed, let our grandchildren pay for it, our great-grandchildren. It works out well. And today you get people with this ridiculous economic mindset. Oh, wars are good for the economy because everything's booming and going at 100%. Really? It's like saying, well, break the glass in your home and you get to buy a new glass, and you keep on breaking it. How's that going to help the economy?
That's good for your economy. It's not good for your economy.
It's good for the glass guy.
Right.
But instead of a broken, all you're doing is repairing but you could be buying a pair of shoes, and someone could be making those shoes, and you could be, for every glass you're breaking, you'd be doing something that's actually more productive for the economy. And it's also free market driven.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, it's an important book, an important topic. We do a class called Economics 101. Now again, Economics 101, they're ready to fall asleep. Well, it's done in a little bit of format. One of the things we do is, what is hard money? What is real money? Well, hard money is something that's backed by a tangible thing, silver or gold. So we have gold coins, we have silver coins to say this is what money was. And guys my age, I remember when there was still some silver coins in circulation, and we used to have these little silver coins, and they were a little different than the other coins and worth a little bit more. Why? Why was this 25 cents 1963 or 64? Why is it worth more than 1965? Because of 65, they put a little bit of copper and nickel in there. They basically broke the law when they, they counterfeited a smashed penny with a little nickel around it. And today, that quarter from 1960, and I just found it in my change.
Did you?
About what, $5 or $6 today, right?
Is that right?
And we tell the people, when I was a young guy, I used to collect baseball cards, as a lot of kids my age did, 12 years old, 10 years old. For 5 cents, we got 5 nice little glossy cards and a big old wad of gum. We would pretend we're chewing tobacco, by chewing it. Today, you have to, if you buy these, they're about $3 or $4, $5 without any gum. It's probably a good thing overall.
I know, and no gum.
Well,
right.
What happened? The technology, the printing abilities, it's cheaper now to print these cards up. So why is that nickel not worth, what used to be a nickel now is a few dollars? It's because of inflation, something that government does. Simply throwing more money into printing up more money and putting it into its circulation drives the value, raises the value of this particular good. You tell people that, a brand new car made in USA was what, $3,000 or $4,000. A house, a nice house with 3 bedrooms, a nice yard, was $12,000. Now it's $500,000.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
A good college education. I think Harvard, it was $3,000 or $4,000 a year tuition, and now it's where it is today. Why? Because you have the federal government. Not only do you have inflation, but you have the federal government messing around with that with their student loans. So it drove the price of everything up.
Yeah, and this is a huge, we'll have to shut her down, but this is a huge conversation because once you control a nation's money supply, well, Meyer M. Rothschild, didn't he say, give me control of the nation's money supply, I don't care
who makes the laws. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and that's what happens, yeah.
Yeah, well, Rand Paul is trying to end the Fed, and so hopefully or audit the Fed. It's never going to happen, but we can.
Well, I'll tell you what, you don't know because what never may happen, there were some people that said there's no way that Donald Trump would ever get elected. It's possible, and here he is. Like him or not, he's in the White House. So
that's a good point.
Possible can become the possible. And again, it's a question of time. It took them a long time to get this. It took them, and when it was first started, it didn't look like it was all that harmful. It took a while for them to get where they are today. So we have to roll. You're not going to roll this thing back overnight. You're not going to. It has to be a gradual thing. It may not happen in my lifetime, but I'd like to say that it may be in a small way. I've helped sort of grease the skids to get back under the Constitution.
That's right.
And I tell people, I said, our generation. Now I'm a late baby boomer. You're a little bit younger than I am.
Yeah.
I don't think you're concise, but our generation failed. We dropped the baton, but we got to pick it up, and we're passing it off to the next generation, which may be the generation where we're either going to be living in a third world environment, or we're going to be living in an environment of freedom and liberty.
Absolutely, moving back towards freedom.
And that's why what you're doing with your boys and my children, if more and more people just understood that, that's the future. And that's what we say, our motto, teaching the present, preparing the future. The future. Anyway, we're a small camp, but we influence one of our videos, got 80,000 views, Willie Soon's video.
Yeah,
we're getting about 1,200 views a day. That's not bad. And the things we do, we can influence, one person, geometrically can influence hundreds of thousands of people.
And I just want to say one more thing, and we can each comment on this, and we'll get out of here. But if people don't get there's a distinction between freedom and slavery, or we'll call it freedom, or a limited constitutional Republican form of government, small r, and a socialist government, which can only last for so long before you get tax, and then it just blows up because you can't afford to give everybody everything that they want. If people don't revere and have immense gratitude for freedom and the opportunity to be and do whatever they want, so long as they're not harming someone else, then they're going to do what human nature does, which is, how can I take care of myself and my family with as little effort as possible? Well, it's
that's right.
Somebody else's stuff. And it's completely immoral. And I think until we have a reformed population that gets, I own me, you own you, that which is mine is not yours, and you can't take forcibly that which is mine and take it from me and my family to give to somebody else, it is morally wrong. And touch that part of people to get them to realize, oh, wait, I never thought of it that way. That's true. Until we flip that switch, I think we're going to keep battling. It's sort of like swinging at the branches rather than chopping at the roots.
That's right. And actually, there's a book about that too. It was what was the famous line between Ralph Waldo Emerson and David Thoreau? Emerson said, "Harvard has all the roots, all the branches of education," and Thoreau said, "Yes." He said, "Henry, but none of the roots. We all the branches, but none of the roots." You know.
I never heard that. I'm a huge Emerson fan. I never heard that.
Yeah, it was a great line. Yeah, one of my favorite lines, and I have issues with both of them. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said, "The more he spoke of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons." You know, I like that one.
The faster what?
The more he spoke of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons.
I didn't hear that one either.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, so parting shot before we go, buddy?
Well, if you've been watching, if you've giving us an hour and a half of your time, I want to thank you, and thank you for having me on for an hour and a half.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give me a break between shoveling snow and painting in my sister's room here, helping my sister out. But please go to our website, campconstitution.net. You can't make it to a camp. Why not have a camp out when you're away? Have one of our speakers come to your neighborhood and speak on these important topics, or perhaps visit our camp. And we're actually having an event April 7th at the camp. We're having a breakfast meeting Saturday. Go to our Facebook page. It has a list of all of our different events around the area. And give us a call. You want to help us out and expand our mission, and help us out financially, help us out with your time or your influence. And thank you again for watching. CampConstitution.net, and you can see the sign in the back here, hopefully.
Is that the phone? I was going to ask for a phone number. Is that the best place if they wanted to reach out to you?
Yes, that's my cell phone number.
All right, move over again. All right, 857. So, pardon me, 857 498 1309. 857 498 1309. Hal Shurtleff, thank you very much for being on, man.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Bless you, man.
If you enjoyed that episode, I'd appreciate it if you took the time to review it and subscribe. And feel free to share with some friends that you love. All right, don't compromise.